Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. This is podcast episode 200. So instead of me talking to somebody else, I'm going to be like a crazy person and talk to myself. And of course, to you, thanks for listening. Or else, I guess this wouldn't be a podcast with no listeners. I wonder how many podcasts actually have no listeners. I used to be a radio DJ up in Haines, Alaska for this small NPR station. And sometimes it was in the middle of the winter, snowing at midnight. And I'd be up in that room wondering if I was actually a crazy person talking to myself or, as usual, a crazy person talking to other people. That's right. It's good to be a little bit crazy in this world. Kind of evens things out, you know? Balances the scale. Crazy world, crazy people, and crazy fun. That's it. You got to make life a little bit fun. So I was going to talk a little bit about how this podcast evolved. So as many of you know, I've been doing lots of online solar classes. And even before I did online solar classes, I remember reading the National Electrical Code and posting it online. That's sort of how it started. That was before the official episode number 1, but I was doing what I called Radio 690. 690 is Article 690 out of the National Electrical Code, and Article 690 of the National Electrical Code is solar photovoltaic systems, and that's what got us here. And so it started off too, especially with the earlier episodes, is I was taking some material out of my classes and just posting it on a podcast. And I would do intros and outros because one of the things that I noticed is driving around in my car, I listened to podcasts myself, and there was nothing out there that was really giving people technical information like people that are NABCEP certified or trying to get NABCEP certified. And you know what? I even listened to my own podcasts because unfortunately, nobody has a photographic memory except for the Rain Man. And we have to go over things different ways, listening to things, watching things, sorting things out in our own minds. In fact, when I was in college, I went to college in Southern California for a while, and I was from Northern California, and I would do this long trip down Highway 5. Probably a lot of people have done that before, and it would be something like 6 hours driving. And what I would do is I would take my notes and I would record it into a tape recorder, and I would try to make it interesting so I could remember stuff. And I would do weird analogies. And so I guess that's the first time I picked up the mic in an educational sense. And what else was kind of cool is back then we had tapes and we had stereo. And I liked to play with wires. I was just messing around. I didn't really know too much what I was doing, but I made it so I could record on the left speaker because I was the driver, and I would make music coming out of the right speaker, and then I could change the balance to tune how much sound is coming from either something like the Grateful Dead. That's right. I was a Deadhead back in those days. Now I just don't admit it as much. And out of the left speaker, of course, would be things like memorizing things for chemistry. I took a lot of hard chemistry classes. I remember like nitrate, nitrite, all these types of things. And it actually comes in handy with what I do right now. So then it sort of turned into me doing stuff for my classes and me listening to my own voice because I was actually listening to my own podcast. It was actually convenient. And I would listen to things and I would learn them better. So just because I said it once doesn't mean that I understood it. And I would listen to things over and over again, sleep to them. Sometimes I would listen to them without paying as much attention, and then it would come and go. And I would just figure as many times as possible. In fact, I just passed an exam that has not much to do with solar, a water board exam. That's right. I passed the water board. There's a lot of jokes that could be made of that, maybe sensitive to some people, so I won't make those jokes. I'll let you make your own. But I have a water D1 license in California, and I need that for this solar training center. But anyway, all I did to study for that is I talked into my phone. I made a whole bunch of recordings, and then I just listened to them over and over again. And I took the test, and it was kind of a test to see if that would even work. And hey, what do you know? I passed. Pretty cool. So then After that, I started talking to other people on the podcast, having long conversations, sometimes splitting it up into 3 different podcasts. And I would do a lot more of editing and putting in intros and outros, which took a lot of time. And kind of the way that my career has happened is I've discovered that if I just do something a lot, I get better at it, like teaching classes in front of people. So especially in the early days, I would have taught any class possible, even if I would have had to pay to teach it. Suckers that paid me, but it's not that way anymore. But I was just trying to get experience. And sometimes I would be teaching 40 hours a week, 4 weeks in a row, in 4 different time zones. That was really tiring. But if you got to think sort of like a doctor, when they go into their internship, they are worked like 28 hours a day, something like that. And so they're just getting good at their skills and just drilling it into their bodies. And I think that's something that people shouldn't have to do, is see a doctor that's worked so many hours like that. But anyway, one of the things that I've done is I've stopped doing the intros and outros for the most part, and I'm just keeping it real. And I noticed too that there's other podcasts out there that just keep it real and they don't do intros and outros. And so far, I've also kept it real by not doing any advertisements. In fact, I don't pay attention at all to how many listeners I have or anything like that, or asking listeners for likes. That you can do that if you want. I guess it's supposed to be able to help me. And nothing against those other podcasts where they, make a living off of it, but I sponsor my own podcast. So in a way, I guess you could say that somebody is paying for the podcast, doing an advertisement, because it's me for my classes. In fact, I even say that during the podcast, like, here's the commercial right now. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Shaun White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Shaun White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Shaun White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. And then another thing that I just did a couple of is fake advertisements, like fresh air, get some today. Kind of reminds me of this old radio show that I used to listen to on NPR, was called Prairie Home Companion. And they did fake advertisements for things like rhubarb pie, Garrison Keillor. I actually was teaching some classes up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I got to see Garrison Keillor a few times in person at the old Fitzgerald Theater. And it was kind of funny. It was like the format of a really old radio show, like that maybe my grandparents would have listened to before they even had television. And they just kind of kept that theme. And so it was like going back in time. I thought that was kind of cool. So anyway, then what started happening is PR people started contacting me, wanting me to interview different people like CEOs and stuff like that. And as long as it has to do with solar and storage, I'd bring them on and I would try to learn from them. And so another thing too is I am a super double, triple, and quadruple tasker. And so if there's somebody that's interesting knowledge that I want to get, that I would gain self-improvement from, why not record that? That way I'll be paying better attention to. That way I could listen to it again. And that way all of you can listen to that too. So as you can see, a lot of times I am learning myself during the podcast. I'm asking them questions. And then when they talk about things that are perhaps more complicated than for the entry-level person, I will have them define those concepts. Like, what type of chemistry is a lithium-ion battery? Is it NMC, NCA? Is it LFP? It's usually going to be LFP in this industry, lithium iron phosphate. I bet we've said that about 100 times during these 200 episodes, or even more. And then something kind of interesting started happening is I started doing podcasts at solar conferences, and that's pretty cool. And I'm trying to think of exactly how that started, but I believe it was Nico Johnson from Suncast invited me to go to the stage at RE Plus last year. And so Nico, as most of you know, is probably the top solar podcaster out there. It's his full-time thing. He's really good at it. And so he runs these stages at the different conferences. And then other podcasters can go up there on the stage. And so that was pretty cool. And then I invited on that first stage, Bill Brooks and Johan Alfson. And we talked about cool, interesting technologies and solar battle of the bands and things like that. Here, let's play a little clip from that podcast. I've got my good friends here, Bill Brooks, and he almost doesn't need an introduction. He's been in the solar industry longer than he's been alive, if you can believe that. and then Johan, he is the Johan. He does have a last name, but he's just saying he's kind of like Ronaldo. Just when we were getting started, before we were talking, Bill was mentioning that he was at the first one of these, and so we're also going to get historical on you right now.
When is the first one?
Because Bill's going to tell us.
I would consider the first one of these happened in, was called Utility Photovoltaic Group, and it was in Chandler, Arizona in 1994.
Wow.
And then SIA had a conference going on at the same time, and they were parallel. And so at some point...
Gather around, kids. Grandpa's got stories.
Right. Grandpa's got stories.
Now back to this podcast. So it was kind of fun. And then another thing that was really cool is I got to talk to Ward Bauer at the NABCEP conference, and I had Bill Brooks help me out with Ward too. And Ward is a friend of both of ours. And Ward pretty much started the solar industry and invented the grid tie inverter, or at least got that to go mainstream. And so that was really cool. Here's a little clip from that episode. Coming to you from the Suncast media stage at NABCEP, the NABCEP Conference 2025. And so I'm sitting here with my friends Ward and Bill, and what this is all about today is we're going to talk to Ward, because I think that it's very important to help out those people that are not born yet, that are going to be born in 1,000 years, to let them know about what's going on in the solar industry and what happened, the history of the solar industry. And so one of my favorite people, my solar superhero, is Ward Bauer. And so Ward's been in the solar industry for quite a while. And I asked Bill to help me interview Ward today too, because Bill and Ward are good friends. And I got lucky enough too to sit on a NABCEP committee with Ward Bauer, and I got to know him that way. And I know that Bill has sat on a lot more committees than I have. And so thanks a lot, Ward, for talking to us today.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to enjoy it, in fact. The PV industry has come a long, long ways. It hasn't been a friendly trip to begin with. Talk about utilities not liking people or systems. We were at the bottom of the list. PV was something they had no interest in. They really did whatever they could do to discourage PV coming onto their grid. It was there.
And back to this episode, one thing that I like is doing historical people. So I like to think of what people in the future will be thinking about. Maybe they'll have a lot more free time, and maybe they will be studying history, which means now. 1,000 years from now, people will be going back to the early days of when people were able to record, when all of this information just started coming out. I mean, you can't hear Julius Caesar in digital format thousands of years later, but you can hear this. What I'm saying right now will probably be around for thousands of years, maybe millions of years. It's kind of weird to even think of that. And they will think that this is very archaic, but then they will get to know all of my guests. And some of these guests are getting older. And so I was just talking about Ward Bauer, but there's another guy that I had on my podcast, and his name is Mark Mrohs. And he was one of my teachers a long time ago. He got into solar in the 70s before people were using solar on Earth. It was space solar. He was soldering things together by hand. And he put together the training for SunPower. And I took his program in 2008 and became SunPower Advanced Certified. He has stories of teaching solar in the early days, going to New Guinea in helicopters, and there being cannibals around. Talk about worker safety. I mean, you don't want to become a meal. when you're installing solar. So anyway, I had Mark on the podcast, and I didn't realize that he was sick, and he unfortunately passed away not long after we did the podcast. So here's to you, Mark. I could see him right now up in the sky. He's a real nice guy. And then he also gave me some job offers for some different companies that he was at over the years. But here's a clip from the podcast with Mark. On today's podcast, we have a very special guest. I was just searching his name on my notes, and I noticed that I had a list of people that I wanted to have on my podcast that I made a long time ago. And guess whose name was at the top of the list? Mark Mrohs. So finally, thank you so much, Mark Mrohs, for being here.
Wow, that's a compliment I haven't heard before. That's really good. Thank you so much, man. I'm happy to be here.
And so I took their class, and I guess it was sort of your class because I think you put all the material.
I wrote the training manual, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you were in charge of that. And then I did the online training for SunPower, and that was your voice, and that was you. And that was probably the first online class I ever took, 2008. And so I've learned a lot from you, a lot more than you probably know.
That's really cool to know. Yeah. That whole episode of SunPower for me was key in my whole life. If you look at a trajectory of your career, that would be the high point. Well, one of several, come on. But I was there from 2005 to 2010, I believe. And that was the beginning of SunPower.
And now back to this show. And probably my number one guest is Bill Brooks. So Bill Brooks teaches a lot of classes with me, and we own a sailboat together. We have matching cars. And Bill Brooks was another one of my instructors who taught me a lot. He's very super smart, maybe the smartest guy I know in this industry. Probably, I think so. Real super nice guy. And so like I mentioned, he was on the stage with me when we were talking with Johan Alfsen, the founder of Solar Battle of the Bands, with Ward Bauer, the godfather of solar, I guess we could call him. Pretty much invented the grid tie inverter in 1977. He's been on millions of NABCEP committees, sits on the NABCEP board. So Bill is the main guy behind writing the National Electrical Code. We also wrote some books together, different editions of PV and the NEC. We teach solar classes at all the big conferences in the United States, like RE Plus and InterSolar. And so in the earlier days, when I was just posting pieces of my classes, he was on a lot of those videos. He was on a lot of those earlier podcasts. And we record a lot of the material in my heat spring classes that's based on the National Electrical Code, the building codes, the fire codes. I record a lot of that at Bill's house with Bill, of course. And Bill and I like to have fun. Let's talk about having fun too. It's like, I think in order to learn, in order to get concepts across, people need to have fun. That's what makes your brain work. That's what makes life worth living, is having fun. Even in the worst situations, people need to smile. People need to laugh. They need to release the tension. They need to understand their own faults and laugh at them. So every once in a while, I have somebody in one of my classes that makes a comment like, how could you improve this class better? And they'll say, knock it off with the dad jokes. Well, I tried the non-dad jokes, and that definitely gets me in trouble. I am a dad. My daughter agrees that I should do dad jokes. But then I also put something in one of my classes like, hey, give me a message whether you like or dislike the jokes in the classes. And everybody gives me a message saying that they like to have fun. They like the jokes in the classes. In fact, something that's kind of interesting is one thing that got me to where I am in this industry is when I was just starting to do teaching, I took a class at the San Francisco Comedy College. And so I put it on my resume that I was a graduate of the San Francisco Comedy College. So this guy named Jacob Travis was starting the Ontario Solar Academy around 2009, I think it was, when he contacted me. And he said that he picked me to teach the classes because it said on my resume that I was a graduate of the San Francisco Comedy College. Ha ha, what a joke that was. And so I try to make things fun. I remember even that there was Laugh and Learn Traffic School, where like, hey, if you're going to have to go to traffic school, you might as well laugh a little bit. And another thing that I just did too is I just signed up for some private tutoring from the San Francisco Comedy College. And I was actually talking to Johan Alfson about that. And he's well known in the industry. If you don't know Johan, you can check out our podcast together. He's been on a few different times. He's also in my PV associate class on HeatSpring. And he actually went to the same college, the San Francisco Comedy College. I think that's more important than getting a PhD for some reasons. So anyway, we were just talking about how the podcast evolved. Another thing that's happened too is I've been getting press passes at the conferences. And the first one came, I was offered it. I got an email from the RE Plus people. They put on the big conferences, also affiliated with SEIA, Solar Energy Industry Association. And they said, hey, do you want to sign up for a press pass? And I did. And then ever since then, when I went to conferences, I got an email from the people at Intersolar US, and they asked me if I wanted a press pass. And I was like, heck yeah. And I think it was just independent of me teaching classes, because I already get free passes to the conferences because I teach classes at the conferences. But they gave me a press pass, and I started getting emails from PR people that were trying to promote products at the conferences. And so I went around to different booths and talked to different people that were at different booths, or we would just kind of find a table and I would record a podcast, a bunch of them at Intersolar. And so then I started putting the word out and getting press passes. And I did that in Intersolar in Germany. I got a press pass over there, and I met somebody that I have not released their podcast yet, but he is another solar godfather. Look out for this episode coming up. His name is Hans Joseph Fell, and he co-invented the German feed-in tariff, which pretty much kickstarted the whole solar industry. Solar electricity used to be 10 times more expensive than electricity from the grid. So what they would do is make a 20-year contract where the utility had to reimburse somebody at a rate that would get them to invest in solar. That's a feed-in tariff. That's a good kind of a tariff. And then as more solar got installed, the prices went down, they lowered the feed-in tariff, and now the price of solar electricity is way less expensive than electricity from the grid. You know, and of course there's different variables about like how sunny it is, how good the business environment is, how much paperwork you have to do, how much the salespeople want, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of cool. I've been getting some of these press passes, and I just got back from another conference called American Clean Power. It was the Clean Power 25 conference, and it is a conference that's kind of interesting. It was a wind industry conference, and they did a switch. They invited the solar people, and now it kind of seems like the solar and storage people are kind of taken over, but there's still some wind stuff there. The tickets are more expensive. Some people were complaining that they were more expensive because they didn't want to pay. And other people were saying that's good that it's more expensive because only important people show up to it. It's not just people off the street, all the homeless people. Just kidding, no homeless people probably at any of these conferences. But it was interesting. And the cool thing that they had there too was Trevor Noah, the comedian. So I'm just talking 2 days ago. When I was there, I was front row center. Trevor Noah is a very smart guy, and he gave some good advice to the solar industry about how we should be marketing ourselves. And the way that I kind of saw what he was talking about is all this stuff, solar, storage, electric vehicles, it's really cool. It's exciting. Everybody should get it, even if it has nothing to do with climate change. Climate change is a benefit, sure, it's a bonus, but driving an electric car is really fun. That was an example that he used. But also having cheaper electricity made with magic, pretty much, sunlight hitting a crystal, that's pretty fun too. And he was even talking a little bit about DEI, which is kind of controversial. So let's do a clip from that because I was recording it.
Let's be honest, America has long held truths that are not held by everyone, right? So for a long time, the truth in America was that black people weren't equal to white people. That was the truth. That's not a fact, though. Yeah, but that was the truth. And people were like, yeah, no, I mean, that's the way it is. And for a long time, women didn't have the same rights as men in America. That was the truth. And so I think we've got to be careful of saying like, oh, we don't all share the same. We will never share the same truth. Different religions are different truths. Different languages are different truths. Different cultures are different truths. You know, what do you eat? When do you eat it? How do you play your music? How do you walk? How do you dress? These are different truths. Facts are the things that we have to agree on. And so the way I think of it is I go, I don't have to agree with you on how the weather feels, because that's your truth.
So that was a pretty cool conference, and I did a couple of interviews at the conference. And I went from trying to post every twice a month or once a week and not even accomplishing that to getting to a point where now I'm recording enough podcasts. It's really accelerated lately where I think I'm recording 3 a week or more. And so if I wanted to spend a whole lot of time like Nico Johnson on the podcast and make all the episodes perfectly edited, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to pump out that kind of volume. But for him, it's a full-time job. He's got lots of staff members and things like that. So maybe my podcast is a little bit more Blair Witch. Blair is my middle name too. It's actually an old family name. And so that just means that I am doing things like recording most of my podcasts on Zoom. And I did try using some of these fancy podcasting softwares and things like that. And it just gets complicated. And I kind of think it ruins the vibe for a lot of people. Most people are familiar with Zoom. It ruins my vibe when I can't get the tracks right and all that kind of stuff. And then as far as recording all these intros and outros, it just takes a lot more time, and I would be putting out half as many podcasts. So I would rather put out more, talk to more people, get more information. And also, like how I was learning to teach by doing a lot of it, I'm doing twice as much or 3 times as much in the way of podcasts, talking to a lot more people. And that way I get better at it from doing more of it. So that's kind of cool. I wrote a couple of things down here too that I just wanted to reiterate that I've talked about over the past. When they talk about climate change, too many people use Celsius. We're Americans. Every degree change in Celsius is 1.8 degrees change in Fahrenheit. So 2 degrees Celsius times 1.8 is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're in America, you shouldn't do everything in Fahrenheit except when you're talking about climate change and then change it to Celsius. Better yet, just say both. It's educational. Another thing is it's nice to see all the manufacturing happening in the United States. And I've got to talk to people that are manufacturing solar and solar cells. I've got to see some of these factories. That's pretty cool. Another thing too is there's a lot of politics. And I know there's people on both sides in the solar industry, and even the people that are on the other side probably mostly have good intentions. They just see the world a different way. So I try not to hate on people, even if they're from the other side. I try to be optimistic. I try to zoom out a lot. We call it the solar coaster. One of the things that happens is when you have anything that is having exponential growth, like the solar industry, like any kind of stock, even like, watching Amazon grow, you have times where it goes up and down really drastically. They call that volatility. There's always lots of volatility when something grows exponentially. This industry has grown faster than any kind of industry ever. And so it is just growing so fast that, of course, there's going to be adjustments along the way that are too drastic for my liking. But I got to zoom out and see how we are still growing. But unfortunately, the politicians like to make abrupt changes. They like people to pay attention to them. And one of the things that I like to advocate for is 1% at a time. If you're going to take away the tax credit, and it's 30%, the first step is to make it 29. And then you figure out when you go to 28. Otherwise, you are wrecking jobs. You're wrecking people's lives. Hey, wait a minute. I was supposed to be optimistic. You are giving people learning experiences. You're stress testing them so they could be stronger. But seriously, Arnold Schwarzenegger had the California Solar Initiative, and it would drop down gradually. That's the way I like to see it. That way we can adjust. When we had net metering 3, or maybe it's not net metering, but that in California, there was this sudden decrease in the amount of money that you could get for exporting electricity. And it was overnight. So what happens is that the time before, so they're going to give you some kind of heads up for a year, something like that, months at least. And everybody's going to be selling like crazy and basing it on buy now or it's going to be terrible afterwards. Then that time happens. And most of the time of your life is after that time happened. And then you have to compete against the old you that was saying it's going to be terrible. So don't undersell your future. If things are going to change, yeah, you can tell them that it's a good idea to get it now, but don't just go like, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be awful, it's the worst thing in the world. Because I know, we all know, that solar and wind and renewables is the cheapest form of electricity that there ever was. Well, maybe we can include hydroelectric too. And, sorry if I said cheap, least expensive form of electricity. I don't want to cheapen our industry. So we can do it. We can make this work. Just remember to zoom out and also to educate yourself. One of the things that you have with volatility and growth is things go up and down on the way up, and it kind of weeds out the weaklings. And what are the weaklings? It makes our industry stronger, perhaps. So the people that are less educated, if there's going to be a layoff, who's going to get laid off? The ones who are not educated. So get your NABCEP certification. Keep your NABCEP certification. Get a whole bunch of them. Work hard. I love this industry. I work harder than anyone, but I love my work. So it's not really hard. It's easy. Love your work, work easy, and make it all happen. We're going to pull this one off. And when you zoom out far enough, you might see your life on this planet being just a little small speck on the timeline, and you'll know that you made a difference. Thanks for listening to Shaun White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast, episode 200. Woo! And at the rate we're going to hit 300 in not too long of a time. Be sure to check out some of my classes. Go to solarsean.com. Click on the links. Make this little speck on the timeline matter. You can do it. Woo! Be optimistic.